Greetings and a warm welcome from me, astrologer Patrick Arundell. Today, in the latest of my deep dive videos, I'm going to explore a truly remarkable celestial event. On February the 28th, we're going to have two Cazimis within the same day. A Cazimi is an ancient Greek term meaning in the heart of. It's when the sun connects with another planet in an exact conjunction. Now we get a Cazimi monthly with the new moon. And in terms of Mercury, which is in Pisces and detrimented there, actually this is a very frequent event. We're going to have another 5 this year. But the other planet, where this occurs at 9:25 p.m. Universal Time, features the mighty Saturn. And this hasn't happened in the sign of Pisces for 28 years. So it's truly structurally important. A Cazimi in a natal chart is when the sun is so close to another planet it's within 17 minutes. The glory of the sun, the warmth, the radiance enriches the other player. But in the case of Saturn, Saturn is the planet of structures, and also in terms of Greek mythology, and its name of Chronos is very much to do with time. Let's just consider the wider zodiac, which begins in terms of the Western tropical zodiac at 0 degrees Aries and is based and predicated on the seasons. So when Saturn last moved into Aries in 1996, it's now completing the last part of its 29.5-year cycle. But the sign of Pisces is very much about culmination. It's the experiences of all the other planets. And of course, Saturn is very much connected with experience. So what are the lessons that Saturn is showing us or wants us to understand at this very important time for us collectively and for the Earth itself? If you're new to my channel, thank you so much for joining me. It's a real pleasure to have you with us. This is very much a community. If you have any thoughts, please share them. I interact with each one. If you're a returning visitor, I really appreciate your company. Your likes, comments, shares and subscriptions are all hugely appreciated. If you've yet to subscribe, I'd be honoured if you did so now. Please click or tap on the bell notification symbol. So the first Cazimi occurs at 8:42 a.m. Universal Time and at 9 degrees 14 minutes in Pisces, which is just inside the first decan of the 3 decans of the sign of Pisces, which is ruled by Jupiter and Neptune, and the first decan is sub-ruled by Neptune. So that creates a very atmospheric placement for Mercury to be. But if we think of essential dignities, Mercury is detrimented in the sign of Pisces. It rules Gemini. Through Gemini, it's very much to do with quick messages, social media, technology, our connections to our neighbours, our siblings, short journeys, and it's very nimble. But in the sign of Virgo, Mercury is much more practical. It's an earth sign, so its precision and analytical skills are always looking to refine and improve, be more discriminating. After all, the sign of Virgo is, in its way, about virtue. So here, it's asking us to really focus on the details. And obviously, a water sign creates more emotion. So the natural logic and detachment that Mercury thrives upon can be eroded. But it's very important to remember that even with the essential dignities and where a planet is afflicted, that it can have qualities. So if you're someone who loves writing poetry, listening to music or composing music, you're very artistic, or you just want to daydream or get near water, perhaps for a lovely walk, then Mercury in the sign of Pisces is superb. And obviously the sun can enrich those interests and qualities that you may have in those kind of ways. Now, the last time Mercury was in a Cazimi with the Sun was on December the 22nd, but it was then in a retrograde in the Earth sign of Capricorn, which is the sign of physical culmination. where we're thinking about our role in life, our connections through our work, our goals and ambitions, anything to do with property and business. But at that time, Mercury was in a retrograde, so that was known as an inferior conjunction. This one is a superior conjunction. But the solar amplification that the Sun brings to Mercury, I really would strongly recommend that you don't see this as being a wounded Cazimi. It still has lots of possibilities. But if you do have planets later on, from about 7 degrees to about 12 in each of the mutable signs, so that's Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius and Pisces, then this event will have more impact upon you in an angular sense. The angles, if we think about it, is the ascendant, the 4th house cusp where we retreat, the 7th house cusp where we relate, and the 10th house cusp where we connect with the wider world. So if we're thinking about this event, we're basically saying that the Cazimi is the 1st house point. So it's an opportunity to initiate something, but it does need to embrace that flowing, rather ephemeral energy of the sign of Pisces. But that's where Saturn coming into the mix is so fascinating. Because, of course, Saturn applying to Mercury can see us thinking a little bit more pessimistically. So let's look at the second Cazimi of the day. This occurs at 9:25 Universal Time, PM. And here, the Sun applies to Saturn, as I said, for the first time in 28 years. The last time was on March the 7th, 1996, in the sign of Pisces. The last time it applied to Saturn recently was on the 16th of February last year in the sign of Aquarius. Now Saturn has a mighty and almost fearsome reputation. One of the things I noticed just flicking through various YouTube material is that I often feel that Saturn seen as very much as the bad guy and Jupiter the out and out good guy. It's very binary. But you know, it's not as simple as that. Saturn can bring us rewards. So if we think that Saturn is entering the last part of its cycle in the sign of Pisces, it moves back into the sign of Aries on the 25th of May 2025 for a relatively short period through to the 22nd of October, but then will come back into the sign of Aries on the 27th of January 2026. We're fully in the cycle then, of course. But you can see, because Saturn's coming through to the end of its cycle, there is lots we can gain from really working with its energy rather than feeling oppressed by its energy. And Saturn can reward us for industry and hard work. The key, however, is the sign of Pisces, certainly through its rulership of Neptune, is a limitless, boundaryless vastness. Neptune is incredibly sensitive, but also an incredibly powerful player. And just like Mercury, the Cazimi with Saturn again occurs just inside that first 10 degrees of the first decan of the sign of Pisces at 9 degrees and 46 minutes. So we really have to be conscious of that double Neptunian energy. So where Saturn wants to put the walls up, Neptune resists any boundaries, and obviously Saturn's very interested in creating boundaries. It wants us to have a sense of structure that we can work within, and Neptune's going to resist that. So in a way, what Saturn's doing in a spiritual context, I feel, is asking us to work at what we can't necessarily see, because Saturn's really interested in perspiration and application, and Neptune can be more interested in escapism and daydreaming. So the only way we can work with this really is to accept the energies of Saturn and try to apply them in an as formed and informed way as we can. If you think about it, Neptune represents a kind of limitless energy, space. And so Saturn and Neptune have almost opposite energy. So we have a competing tussle here going on. So as much as Saturn may try to put boundaries on things here, it could find it difficult. But what we are seeing is the power of Neptune on Saturn. Now, one of the most unfortunate examples of this was when the Russians destroyed the Kakhovka Dam on the 6th of June 2023. So the structure of the dam, which obviously held the water back, but also was an important road across the top of that dam, and that road was what the Russians wanted to finish, but also has caused huge ecological damage. So the ruthlessness of Saturn was using the power of water, Neptune, in order to wreak havoc on the agricultural potential of that whole area, which obviously Ukrainians are hugely dependent on. And the interesting thing with Saturn is that it does influence agriculture, seeds and planting. So you can see that even Saturn in that context is being hit by the sheer force of that water. But then we're experiencing huge amounts of storms, downpours. We're seeing our ecosystems, rivers and seas poisoned by lots of things we can't necessarily see, invisible threats, Neptunian. And we're also seeing a lot of erosion to hills and cliffs and pathways and roads and houses falling into the sea as the sea level rises and laps away at the cliffs, pulling more material down. So as much as Saturn wants to limit, Neptune is limitless, and in that sense we should have huge respect for the energy of Neptune. So let's just talk about Pisces. So Pisces energy, Pisces people have a reputation of being very sacrificing, very giving, hugely intuitive. It's a psychic sign. It's very much to do with how we feel things. It's not so much to do with what we can see and practicalities, which is very Virgoan, very Tauran, very Capricorn, which Saturn rules. But the importance of Pisces energy cannot be underestimated, because Jupiter, the co-ruler, is very much about the higher spiritual principles of healing, care, nurture, helping one another, showing that compassion in a constructive way. But what we've seen, particularly in Britain, I can't speak for anywhere else, is a huge running down of a lot of the compassion, whether it's in social services, whether it's in the National Health Service, whether it's in mental health care and support. All of these things have been run down. So Saturn in its most negative guise, or perhaps Pluto, through the sign of Capricorn, has seen the march for money and profit really trashing the whole concept of feelings. So that's why science very often likes to have a little bit of a pop at astrology. Oh, well, astrology's all a load of bunkum. And yet how many times do we hear scientists say, we now know that this star, in other words, they've changed their theory. It was only ever a theory before. Whereas our respect of the planets, their movements and the gravitational pull they create means that we have a constant source of information that can help to guide us. It's a living, breathing being, which is absolutely fantastic. Quite opposite to what Saturn can be like if you care. But what Saturn can help us to do is all take that more spiritual, psychological and more feeling side of life much more seriously. So if we've been neglecting ourselves, our own inner worlds, in our pursuit of profit, in our pursuit of goals and ambitions, we're not in touch with how things feel. We're not so atmospherically connected. This double Cazimi is a wonderful opportunity to think about it and to talk about it, Mercury, and in terms of Saturn, to endeavour to show more industry in terms of embracing our inner worlds or showing our compassion for other people who don't have it so easy. So whatever our situation, we can still work with this double Cazimi in such an incredibly important way. So let's just think about a few other themes. We have had a huge, it seems to me, expansion of the use of recreational drugs ever since Neptune moved into Pisces in 2012. Now everyone has a different relationship with this topic. You might see that, that's perfectly okay. And anyway, prescription drugs are another form of escapism from the reality of ill health, and I really hear that. I suppose whether it's drugs or alcohol, it's all about the extent, and certainly Jupiter expands, so the escapism may have been even greater. But Jupiter is, after all, the greater benefit. But of course, the paradox is Saturn is the greater malefic. So just another counterpoint there between the different energies. The other thing to think about is that Saturn used to be the last of the 5 planets that people thought they could see. In actual fact, they could see Uranus, it just wasn't discovered. So the Sun and the Moon, known as the light carriers, the luminaries, and then we have Mercury and Venus and Mars and Jupiter and Saturn. So it was the outer point of our awareness at that time. But now, of course, we know that things are much more expansive than that, not least through the discovery of the mighty but the tiny Pluto. And while Saturn can still retain its energies as the celestial taskmaster, I do feel it can be softened by Pisces, more sensitive energies. We must also consider that Saturn is also closely tethered to the concept of karma. So whether you were alive 28 years ago when this event occurred last time, or your life has begun since then, or you're further on in your life experience, a lot's happened in those 28 years, my word. And we can think about how things have played out for us in each of our individual life experiences, because now we can start to see the reality. Because Saturn can be very much to do with wisdom. Of course it can be to do with authority. It can be to do with practicalities. But let's say, for example, you're reading an article about people not turning up for their interviews at jobs because they've lost motivation. They don't know what their structure is. They've had so much freedom, it's very difficult to suddenly feel motivated to apply to some kind of expectation of how it should be in terms of their management of time. So that's very Neptunian Jupiterian, isn't it, really? And Saturn's saying, look, with freedom comes responsibility. That's not a political gesture or comment, it's true. If we all put something in and we want something back, then it's a good energy that's flowing backwards and forwards. So we all do need boundaries, even if we may sometimes resist them, that's for sure. But we must be aware that the sign of Pisces can at times be a little bit distorting and self-deluding. So if there is something that's presenting itself to us in our situation at the moment, no bad thing to try to bring in that earthy energy of Saturn to bring a bit more reality to bear. Now, one of the things I would like to see is greater scrutiny of water companies in the United Kingdom, because a lot of them have had very light regulation, and we've seen an extreme increase in the amount of pollutants that are going into to rivers and to the sea, because they can make more profit by not supervising things properly. And this is a huge scandal. And this is what I mean about karma. So now the problem, after years of people campaigning very strongly, is being flagged up in a much more manifest way. We also know we've got microplastics floating around in almost every part of the food chain, and most certainly in the oceans. That's damaging fish, Pisces. Also, we've got these huge ocean cruisers. Now, I'm sorry if you enjoy cruises. I think they're absolutely terrible from an ecological viewpoint. And I personally don't get being thrust together in a contrived way with lots of other people. It's just not my scene at all. But let's think about the engines, the particulates that are pumped out from those huge engines. And more of these ships are being built. And I don't think it's great. And then we've seen also a really bad situation in Britain where a shipping company called P&O just laid off all their staff that had worked on a particular route over to Calais for years and years and years, laid them off, didn't follow all the proper pre-established ways of going about that situation. There was no consultation, and these people lost their job and were forced out, and cheap labour was brought in to replace them. Now this is where consumers go wrong, because no one should be going on those ships. You shouldn't do it, because you should stand united in the principle of fairness. You know, the people who are on those ships probably weren't paid a fortune in the first place, but they would have had accumulated pension rights, and that's what they're trying to push back on. The company would say, we couldn't make it viable. I don't think that when it was really scrutinised that was true. It was about reaching for more profit. So the race for profit, Pluto through Capricorn, to the excess has distorted our need to be in touch with how things feel. So when I work with clients, quite often, whatever size of organisation they work for, whether it's a big blue chip company or it's a governmental organisation, really under a lot of duress and pressure to give out ever more results. And of course AI is coming in as well. So what we need to do collectively with this event is just say, let's have a big think in our own lives, me too, about how we can restructure things to make sure that the feeling, spiritual and compassionate side of life is at the centre of what we're doing, not somewhere on the periphery. It needs to be part of how we are leading our existence. And that, for me, is the massive opportunity with this event. I'm now going to go through each of the 12 signs, from Aries through to Pisces. But if you would like to embrace the wonderful power of astrology, if you give me 3 pieces of personal birth data of time, date and place, I can produce for you your life roadmap report, which is totally unique to you, which will give you searing insights into what's make you tick, the experiences and patterns you've had, and how a more intimate understanding of the planetary influences in that document can help you to guide your future life in a more effective way. Also, my special package, you can get 30% off. You'll get your 12-month transits. That's the moving planets in the sky interacting with your unique document. Please see below for more. So Aries, I think the best way to embrace this event is actually to see it in a kind of symbolic way of shining the light, the sun, into the darkness. But that's not because of Saturn. It's not because Mercury is detrimented. It's because it's the 12th house. And the 12th house is what we fear. And it can be what we can't physically see. And of course, Saturn can arouse the doubts, the limitations. But what you can do, I feel, is accept that Saturn has been in the 12th house over the last year. And if there are parts of your situation that make you feel vulnerable, that you're unsure of, you don't know you can absolutely trust certain people in your circle. If there is sensitivities you have or anxieties that in themselves are tricky, the best way to handle this is really to just face it, to look into it. And you may see if you get more intimately attached to some of those things that you feel could be psychologically challenging, actually as you work through a series of dark tunnels, you may see there's no water coming in. You may see the roof is secure. They're still yours. We all have them, but you can get so much more familiar with them. But if there are people who are not good for you, or there are situations that haven't been good for you, that have come to an end over the last year, I think what you can do is use this event to become much more philosophical about that and just let them go. So Taurus, if you look back over the last 12 months that Saturn's been in Pisces, have there been some big shifts in your future life direction? There may have been some goals and ambitions that were really inspiring you in the 2.5 years before that actually are not quite doing it for you in the same way now. And that is because sometimes when we do set our intentions and we reach that prize, by the time we get there, we've actually changed. It doesn't mean to say that we're not still going to do the final module on that exam paper, or we're not going to stick to the end of our contract on that job. We're going to do that because that gives us that sense of completion, and obviously it gives us a great sense of satisfaction, maybe great pride, maybe something material came to pass as Saturn was moving through Aquarius for you. But things are more subtle now. The 11th house is much more to do with your highest hopes. It's less tangible. It's more spiritual. but it also relates to your friendships, also relates to your group dynamics and your connections, your network. And it's possible that that's an area that has come under a little bit of strain over the last year. So if you have found yourself rethinking, there could be some more of that to be done at this particular time. Obviously, the steadfastness of Saturn combined with the quick wits of Mercury means that you could find it a little bit less, you could find yourself a little bit less able or a little less flowy in the way that you're expressing yourself. But this slowing down can actually be very, very good for you if you take the breath and just think, well, okay, maybe this is a transitional phase for me, but it's one that's still potentially full of glory. It's just different glory from what I thought was going to be the meaning of my journey only a year or so ago. So Gemini, the story for you regarding the sign of Pisces, I think really started to become much more accentuated when Neptune moved in 2012 into this sign. You may have embraced a work that's much more psychological or spiritual or less material in itself, but since Saturn moved into the sign a year ago, maybe even the thing that inspired you all those years ago has lost a little bit of its luster. But that's only one possibility. There's never only one with astrology, because it's how we're relating to the influence. Saturn can be a force for good. So if you've rolled up your sleeves, applied yourself to a goal or a plan, and really gone for it, with your ruler Mercury in the mix, this could be a high point, a time when you become, where you can raise your profile, achieve more recognition, apply for that job which you could be successful with, or make progress with your own business. But the converse can be equally true. It depends on your individual journey through these planetary influences. What I would say is that if you do need to reset because your circumstances have changed beyond your control because of the wider economic environment or the way employers business is not quite the same through the crunch and through COVID, then maybe that reset can sharpen up where you need to head next, because with Venus and Mars and Pluto in the valuable ninth house of your situation, you could be in the mood for a change, but it needs to be a change that really not only inspires you, but also does give you something more tangible back as well. So if you have been ploughing away, working very hard for years, and something you deeply believe in, you are actually looking for a little bit of substance too at the present time. So Cancer, the combination of Saturn and Mercury and the Sun in the ninth house, could get you thinking a lot about philosophy. Ninth house very much linked to that. And that comes from the rulership of Jupiter of the sign of Sagittarius. Of course, Jupiter's in the mix with Pisces, so we bring philosophy with a meaning. So it's not just scrolling through ancient texts and enjoying the historical context, but if you do travel, the chances are the historical side of the experience and seeing how people live in a different cultural way could actually be of great interest to you. But because of the more Piscean influence, the desire to widen your understanding of situations doesn't necessarily just have to go through your holidays or what you're reading. Maybe it's to do with widening your understanding of your own attitudes. Remember, Saturn in Pisces is about the end time. So it could be that you're examining some of your own higher values over the last 28 years or so and thinking, well, could I have done some things differently? What's the higher truth? Mercury isn't so keen either in the sign of Pisces or the ninth house sign of Sagittarius, because it likes to sort of squirm out of those deeper reflective conversations. But you may be having them with yourself. You may be talking to some kind of advisor, whether it's an accountant, a solicitor, a counsellor, a business coach. All those things are entirely possible at the moment. Or you may be thinking about a new mode of transport. But if you are, it is going to be important that you really do your research in a very forensic way. So Leo, if you think back a year ago to when Saturn moved into Pisces, has there been any change in the way that you're connected to others? This could be around an intimate relationship where there may have been a bit of a cooling, but equally you may have grown closer to someone when you've decided that they were worthy of your investment. 8th house, Saturn, business, being serious, an investment of your affection for them. But it's not one directional, it can be multifaceted, this. Of course, the 8th house can also be about long-term finances. You may have decided to change your bank, your insurance provider over the last year. A source of income that has proved reliable in the past may have changed, particularly if it's connected to somebody else. So maybe your partner's work has been, or business has been affected in some way, or perhaps there's been a change in the premiums paid out on some kind of pension plan, insurance policy. But the 8th house is also where we can recreate, rejuvenate ourselves in a more psychological and spiritual way, but sometimes we have to go through some kind of confrontation in order to get the release and the improvement. It's very scorpionic, essentially. So with Pluto, Venus and Mars being in your 7th house, if you're fortunate enough to be building an alliance with somebody new, this set of energies could really be the big question mark. Can it go deeper? Can it become more committed? But the opposite can be absolutely true. If you're feeling you're not getting enough acknowledgement, recognition and affection back from someone, certainly Venus in the 7th house, it could be making you think again. Mars in the 7th house being feisty about your needs, and the 8th could see with Saturn there, you go through some transformation which could be bringing something to a close. Now that may be a business relationship, it could be with a flatmate. It doesn't necessarily have to always be in a personal context, but a powerful time for where you're most invested psychologically, spiritually, financially or sexually. So Virgo, since 2012 you may have experienced some magical connections in relationships or friendships. You may have found people that you can really sort of connect at a higher spiritual level, or you may have also experienced someone who was elusive, evasive, non-available, maybe even a downright liar. And since Saturn moved into your 7th house a year ago, chances are that you've started to really reinforce your boundaries in a much more robust way. Good for you if so. But one of the things about building a wall is that once we're inside that wall, it stops us connecting to other people. So the symbolism of Saturn being the wall, but Mercury being the conversation is quite interesting. Perhaps you can just sort of open that hatch at the front of your castle and say, well, I'm open to discussion, but you've got to respect me, which would be fair enough, wouldn't it? So do try to keep the dialogue going, because however you see it or someone else sees it around a business matter, around a family disagreement or around a relationship situation, if we take an entrenched view, it won't shift. We can stay inside the castle, we can keep the drawbridge up, we will be safe, we can patrol across the top to make sure they're not trying to climb up the outside wall, we can make sure the burning oil is, I'll just check, that's on 200, ready to go if I need it. So it's good to be protective, but if we're so protective, say in a sports scenario, if we get all the players behind the ball and the other team can't score, that's grand. But neither can we win. To win we have to at some point move forwards, and that means attacking, that means exposing ourselves, being a bit more vulnerable. So you could keep yourself very, very robustly safe at the moment and choke off any oxygen coming in, or you can get a nice balance between the two things. These are my minimum requirements. If you don't keep to those, bang, that drawbridge is up. Don't be climbing up the wall because the oil is going over. I've ordered some more in my weekly shop and they never substitute it. They've always got plenty of it, which is great. Or you can just open that window, put a cup of tea through and just see what comes from it. So it's about finding the balance. Now, if you're lucky enough for things to be going well at work and in a relationship, Saturn and Mercury merging on the 7th house could see you make a concrete commitment, which is going to be lasting. So Libra, a lot of talk, of course, in recent times about Pluto's journey coming to its brief end in the sign of Aquarius. Of course, it's going to be back into Capricorn on the 2nd of September through to 18th of November for one final fling. But we mustn't disregard the role of Neptune since 2012 in your 6th house, which forges a quincunx to your sign. That's awkward because the 1st house is about what we want individually. That's your ascendant, your sun. The 6th house is where we work, where we try to be organised, structured, virtuous, make sure things work. But Neptune, 6th house, is a fuzzy energy. It could be that at times you've given so much to the cause that it's left you feeling utterly wrung out. Neptune, Pisces, water. But it's been difficult for you to say no because you've been really conflated by all these emotional pressures with Pluto and before that Saturn and before that Jupiter all going through your 4th house. So Saturn a year ago moving into your 6th house was saying, look, there are certain situations I won't go beyond the call of duty. I've done that too many times since 2012 and I need to be more protective. That's really, really good. But the 6th house can also be quite brittle. You don't want to lose your humanity by setting your boundary. But also because Saturn is also to do with work, perhaps your work has become in some ways more serious or a little bit more of a strain or more of a drudge since last March the 7th when Saturn moved. So even if it's something you've really enjoyed, maybe you're being pushed in some ways to make it more formulaic, more digestible to a wider group of people. So in other words, improving your skill set, so you can get more jobs, or the jobs you're doing, you have to work ever harder like everyone else is doing. But it may have felt like it was a tale of limiting reward. So more effort, less reward. More effort, less reward. So what are you going to do? Well, now all this energy moved into Aquarius. Pluto, 21st of January, then of course Mercury, then Venus, then Mars. That's all been pushing you, particularly Venus, your ruler, to showcase your talent. But talent's a great thing, but it ain't no good just in the theory of our minds. We have to put that talent into some kind of container, and that container requires industry, dedication, and it requires discipline. All very 6th house, very Virgoan if you like, that attention to detail. The key is not to resent the fact that some of that flair still needs to be shaped into something which gives the overall piece form and function. So with Mercury in the mix as well, that could be you writing out your list of what you will do for others and what you won't do for others, your terms of reference. Do you have a terms for reference? Or are you still doing too much for others or doing too much for yourself? Somewhere in the mix, more self-care is needed. And the 6th house can be about your health, and if you're feeling weary and tired and drained, and have done since 2012 in one way or another, this particular event is asking to really make some significant changes around nutrition, exercise, and how much you give to others in order to bring yourself back into a better trim. Now that's going to be helped by the 2nd solar eclipse in your sign on the 2nd of October. The last one on the 18th of October last year certainly helped, but this next one is going to have a much cleaner energy in it because Mercury is going to be applying to it as well. Ironic, because Mercury's in this event too. So it's how you think as much as what you do, which is really important at the present time. So Scorpio, Saturn in the 5th house over the last year. What have you noticed? Because you've got Uranus, and Uranus has been in your 7th house 5 months of 2018, all the time since March 2019. Maybe your relationship sector has been a bit up and down, changeable. One minute you've needed to be up close and personal, and the next you needed some space. Perhaps there's been a breakup in a long-standing relationship or an electric connection to somebody new. Saturn a year ago moving into your 5th house slowed things down somewhat, and of course Jupiter moving into your 7th house last May brought some softness and some greater possibilities to your relationship. So maybe there has been actually an improvement over the last year. But of course your 2 rulers have now moved into your 4th house, which is very much about emotions. can be to do with big change in the guise of Pluto, and Mars can be prickly and defensive in the fourth house. How is it all panning out? Well, I think that's the question that needs to be answered on this event. Saturn in the fifth house in a natal chart is a mighty influence. It suggests to the consulting astrologer for the client that maybe they haven't always found it easy around romance. And if they have had a successful romance, the chances are it's because they've really worked at it. And of course, that particular influence won't be working in isolation to the rest of the map. But having Mercury there in the fifth house, well, that's interesting. If you've ever experienced anyone with Mercury in Leo, you'll know that they have a lot of enthusiasm and passion to get their voice heard. But of course, Saturn can be a bit limiting. So if you are in a situation romantically where you're finding it a bit hard to really relax and be yourself, maybe it isn't the right relationship for you. If you're with someone who really gets who you are and appreciates your steadfastness, your investment into the situation, you could get closer. It's not binary. It can be subtle in so many different ways because actually it depends on each and every Scorpio ascendant and Sun person's particular situation. But what I would say is that Saturn here, if you really want to be much more dedicated to your creative talents, you've got another window of opportunity over the next year or so to really keep working as hard as you can, because that can render results. So it's all about application really, but I feel that things did start to head in your direction more once Jupiter moved into your seventh house, and maybe Saturn now, a year on, you've got more time or used to working with it. It's basically saying don't accept second best, but at the same time you have to work to a first class standard yourself. So Sagittarius, you're such a free spirit. You know, your desire to be adventurous and independent is the stuff of astral law. There have been some changes, especially since 2012 with Neptune moving into your fourth house. And because Neptune is getting more towards the end of its journey, it's affected pretty well every Sagittarius person now. So Neptune in the fourth house is in heightened sensitivity. Perhaps some frailty at times has emerged. Perhaps that desire to just wander wherever you want has been in some ways not deflected but reflected by another part of your nature that does need nurture. And so interesting that Saturn moved to join up with Neptune last year on March the 7th. How's it been since then? Have you found that there's been limitations around your home or family life? Has the roof leaked? Have you had to move? Have you had to improve? Have the neighbours been particularly noisy and uncaring? It's all possible. But the great thing is that your ruler Jupiter is in this particular mix through its co-rulership of Pisces, and that tells you that information will always help to give you the way forwards, and also that part of you that's never going to stand still. You're always growing, always evolving, and that's a glorious thing to have. So although Saturn may be making you much more conscious of the benefits of having a firm base for your existence, your wanders, or whether you've done a lot of wandering and come back to more familiar territory in recent times, wouldn't be a surprise. Doesn't mean to say you're not going to wander again. It means that you're becoming much more aware that your internal world is just as exciting as the glorious outer world that you may have backpacked around vigorously over recent years. So Saturn combining with Mercury in the fourth house could lead to some very thoughtful conversations with people close to you. But it could also mean that someone's going to confront you, because with Pluto now in your third house, it's not just about you expressing ideas. There's going to be some incoming. Mars is there as well. Someone may be quite vocal in expressing how they feel about you, but try not to be defensive. The fourth house can be very protected, which is good. We think about the archetype of the overall zodiac. Saturn in the fourth sign of Cancer is detrimented. So you could argue this is not the greatest place for Saturn to be. So if you are feeling less than your best at the present time, that tenderness can really be amped up. But that part of you that's always open to new knowledge, you can draw down through the conversations that Mercury enables through this event. There's lots going on in your inner world that's enriching you at such an extraordinarily strong pace. And once Saturn fully moves into Aries in January 2026, after its brief sojourn, you're really going to be setting course, with Neptune also obviously moving, in a much brighter, much more outgoing phase of your life. But for now, it's about really getting your inner world, the core of your existence, really working as efficiently as possible. So Capricorn, this event has particular resonance for you because of course it involves your ruling planet of Saturn. Neptune, 2012, third house. A swirling mist of information has seemed to have enveloped you at times. You may have been much more sensitive about social media. I really don't blame you for that. Obviously it's lovely to see people sharing nice and happy things, but it's a very complex world, isn't it? You know, and of course it's controlled. We don't necessarily see our friends sharing the things that are going on because we're not able to. So in a way that is distorted beyond our control anyway. But of course Neptune can create that distortion, Jupiter can create that amplification. So your sensitivity around conversations close and every day has probably been quite high since 2012. But then to that fast forward to 2023, March the 7th, Saturn moves into your third house. And it's kind of saying to you to perhaps work at your ideas, your belief system, third house, how you actually express your ideas, not just the ideas themselves. You could have become an authority in your work if you're sharing ideas. If you are interested in anything to do with technology or the internet and you're really beavering away, progress can be made, undoubtedly. But also Saturn in the third house can be quite blunt and perhaps find it difficult to see the finesse in situations, whereas Mercury here, which is very much to do with those quick darting insights, can actually be really good, an offset. Third house. So if you are having serious discussions with your neighbours, your siblings, you're thinking or working within your community in some kind of way, this can be a very rewarding period. You mustn't see Saturn as only being half glass, half empty. Remember, by nature, you're steadfast, very invested in what's important to you. Whereas others flap, you keep it going. So the communication can keep going. It may be quite subtle how this is going to play out. The one thing I would say is if you have been feeling a little bit rusty in terms of the personal exercise, I wouldn't be trying to sprint round the block at the speed of light. You know, start off with some steady steps, a bit of swimming, cycling even, but important to wear a helmet, I'd say, with Saturn on the third house, connecting with Mercury. Transport, I think you can see the connection there. And if you are thinking about a new mode of transport, think about it really carefully and you'll get just the right solution for you. But if you have got a piece of kit that needs servicing, a good time to do it. But it's about taking dialogue seriously. The third house can be a bit frivolous, to be honest, but this is where your ruler Saturn can be such an ace for you, because you can bring your steadying, quietly authoritative and knowledgeable input to a situation in a very valuable way. Aquarius, if you go back to 2012 when Neptune went into Pisces, how has your life changed since then until when Saturn moved into Pisces a year ago? Interesting. Obviously I can relate to this myself. Saturn moving into Pisces may have, certainly has in my case, because my business started 29.5 years ago, so it's coming back to the end of its cycle. It's having its solar return, if you like. And yeah, I do need to change some things. I need to reinvent things, freshen things up. And you will see elements of that unfolding in the weeks and months to come, I hope. But the second house is also about our sense of self. It's our foundations. obviously Saturn can be about where we live and the walls of a situation. So we can have the money, but we also need to have the right values within the mix. Otherwise we're doing something that's well paid, that's soulless, or we're doing something that we love that doesn't keep the roof on top of those walls. So it's finding a balance, and that may be what a lot of us Aquarius folks have been grappling with over this last year. But the great thing now is that with Mercury in the mix, if you have been working hard, very hard on some new creative projects, and with that cluster of energy in Aquarius, you can start to see things shaping up. You can start to see that a new foundation is being forged, which is going to be solid. And the important thing is the values of that foundation really fit with your heart. So Pisces, there's an interesting set of competing energies with Pluto, Venus and Mars in your 12th house. It's all to do with relating to people, but perhaps maybe the not so obvious sides of relationships, maybe secret relationships, confidential discussions could be where you work behind the scenes. It may be where you're holding secrets of other people's information and knowledge. But all this clustering of energy in your sign, which obviously features Neptune, Saturn and Mercury along with the Sun, is all about you, the individual. So there may be part of you that is just caring for and easing along that 12th house stuff, but the stars are also asking you to draw your attention to this singular purpose of what's going on in the sign of Pisces. And there's a contradiction, because often you get your purpose by being supportive and helpful to other people. And at the moment, you could be discovering that some of the people you've been helpful and supportive to haven't really appreciated it as much as they could. And that may be a very sore point. However, what you can do is therefore take more possession of your energy and your time to focus it onto what's really important for you. So if your physical vitality has felt a little deflated over the last year, or you felt you've always been the one that everyone either goes to for support or goes to moan against, it wouldn't be a surprise. But a new beginning is building up, and this new beginning is an opportunity for you to demonstrate your individuality. But if you are someone who spends a lot of your time in a support role or helping people behind the scenes, it means you've got to really steal the limelight, take hold of it and have the confidence to do that. But you may not get instant plaudit. So if you're starting something afresh at the moment, it's likely to feel a bit low key, a bit low energy. But don't underestimate how important it is, because you're planting the seeds. And remember, Saturn can be very much to do with seeds of something that's going to flower over a very long period of time, over the next 28 and a half years, because you've obviously had a year of Saturn in your sign, and then you'll get the outcome of that particular phase. So this is a secular event for you, but you just need to push on with what you've been doing over the last year and really get cemented down what's important to you in terms of your individual desires and personal expression. It's been a real pleasure being with you. Thank you so much for joining me. Please check out my March in-depth deep dive video for each of the 12 zodiac signs. I don't do an overview, 12 individual signs, by seeing the link beneath this video. And please like, comment, share or subscribe.